colonel's laugh was not loud. That was what I remembered afterward. Not a bellow, not a performance. Just a short, dry sound, the kind a man makes when he sees something beneath his notice. He made it the moment Captain Reyes turned from the map board and the sleeve of her jacket rode up past her wrist. The scars ran from her left hand to somewhere above the elbow. Old burns, deep set, the skin pulled smooth in places and ridged in others. She had not hidden them. She never did. She simply wore them the way she wore her rank, without announcement, without apology. The colonel said, "Command sent us a souvenir, not a soldier." There were 11 of us in that briefing room. A coalition command post, Eastern Theater, February, the kind of cold that found every gap in the prefab walls. 11 officers around a table covered in overlays and coffee cups and the morning's casualty reports. I was the 12th man, seated to the colonel's left, 12 years in, a major with enough time on the job to know better and not enough spine in that moment to prove it. Nobody laughed with him, but nobody spoke either. I did not speak. I remember that clearly. Captain Reyes looked at the colonel for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned back to the map board and resumed her brief as if the air in the room had not changed at all. Her voice did not waver. Her pointer did not shake. She finished her assessment of the northern supply corridor, noted the 3 choke points, recommended the adjusted patrol timing, and asked if there were questions. There were none. General Harwick had been sitting at the far end of the table with his hands folded and his expression unreadable. He waited until Reyes collected her materials. Then he said quietly, "Captain, wait outside, please." And when the door closed behind her, he looked down the table at the colonel and said, "Bring me her file." The colonel's aide left the room. Nobody spoke. The general did not look at the colonel again. He looked at the table, or at something past the table, and the room stayed very still. The file came in a gray folder with a classification band across the front. The general did not open it himself. He slid it to the center of the table and said, "Colonel, read it aloud. Start at page 3. I watched the colonel's face as he opened to page 3. I was close enough to see his eyes move across the first paragraph. Something shifted in his expression, not much, and he controlled it quickly, but it was there. He began to read. The action had occurred 19 months earlier. A forward observation post in a valley we did not officially occupy. A 6-person combat controller team inserted to coordinate air support for a ground element that had walked into an ambush 2 ridges over. The team reached the post at ZO 340. By 0512, the post was taking direct fire from 2 directions. By ZO 520, the team leader was dead. By 0537, the post radio operator and both security elements were down. Captain Reyes, then First Lieutenant Reyes, was the last person standing at that post. The colonel read without inflection. I think he believed at first that he could read it that way. Flat, bureaucratic, get through it. The general let him try. She had called the first strike at 0541 with a fractured left hand, directing 2 FCA-18s onto a heavy weapons position that had been walking rounds up toward the post for 11 minutes. She called it correctly. The position was destroyed. She called the second strike at ZO 604 onto a vehicle column that was moving to cut off the ground element's extraction route. She called that one correctly too. By that point, her sleeve was on fire. She put it out and kept the radio. The colonel's voice had changed by the time he reached page 4. He did not stop reading. He was a man who had given orders in difficult places and understood, at some cellular level, what the document in his hands was describing. The flat tone was gone. What replaced it was not emotion exactly. It was the sound of a man reading something that was correcting him, sentence by sentence, and not able to do anything but let it. She held that post for 9 hours and 14 minutes. She directed 14 airstrikes. She maintained communication with the ground element through 2 radio failures, the second repaired with wire stripped from a field phone and her teeth. She brought 4 aircraft off target safely in degraded visibility conditions that 2 of the pilots later said they would not have trusted to a more experienced controller. She did not leave the radio until the ground element, 31 men, had crossed to the extraction point and confirmed. They were clear. 31 men, the ground element she'd never met. Men from 3 different countries, pinned in a valley, who came out because someone they did not know stayed on a burning post and did not stop working. The colonel reached the last entry on the final page. His voice had gone quiet by then, not from reluctance, I think, but from the weight of the words. He read, "Subject declined medical evacuation until confirmation received that all supported elements had exfiltrated. Subject walked to the extraction vehicle under her own power. Injuries sustained. 3rd-degree burns, left hand and forearm. Fractured metacarpals, left hand, perforated left eardrum. Lacerations. Time on post, 9 hours, 14 minutes. Strikes coordinated, 14. Assessment, the sustained, accurate fire control maintained by subject under direct fire and casualty conditions directly enabled the extraction of 31 personnel who would otherwise have been cut off. Without subject's actions, extraction was not possible. The colonel closed the folder. The general said nothing. He did not need to. What happened in that room happened slowly, and it happened because it was the only honest thing left to do. The colonel stood up. Not quickly, not with theater. He stood the way a man stands when the accounting has come due, and he understands the balance. He walked to the door, opened it, and Captain Reyes was standing 3 feet away in the corridor, her materials under her arm, waiting with the patience of someone who has learned that waiting costs nothing. The colonel came to attention and rendered a full formal salute. She returned it. He said, "I was wrong, Captain. I apologize." She said, "Noted, sir," and nothing more. I stayed at that table for a long time after the room cleared. I thought about 11 officers who had sat in silence, while a man with eagles on his collar called a decorated combat controller a souvenir. I thought about the 31 men who came home from a valley they should have died in. I thought about the 2 seconds she had looked at the colonel before turning back to her map. She had known, in those 2 seconds, exactly what was in that file. She had known what she had done, and what it had cost her, and what it had bought for men who would never know her name. And she had turned back to her work. I have served with officers who carried their records like weapons, who made sure every room knew what they had done. Reyes carried hers like something private, something that belonged to the dead and the living she had kept apart, not to her. I said nothing when the colonel spoke. That is the fact I carry. I have tried, in the years since, to be the man who speaks, the one at the table who does not wait for a general to produce a gray folder before he understands who is in the room with him. I don't always manage it, but I no longer require a file to tell me what a person is worth, some debts you can't repay. You can only make sure they teach you something permanent.